Commander Veshkara stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars through the viewing screen with satisfaction burning in his chest. 3,000 years of Kryn dominance had taught him that the galaxy belonged to those who took it, and the Kryn hegemony had taken more than most civilizations would dream of conquering in 10 lifetimes. His fleet of 12 warships moved through space like predators stalking prey, each vessel a masterpiece of Kryn engineering with hulls that shimmered with energy-dampening fields and plasma lance, arrays capable of melting through asteroid fields in seconds. Commander, his tactical officer called out from her station. We are approaching the coordinates where the human vessel was last detected. Veshkara nodded slowly and clasped his four-fingered hands behind his back, a gesture of confidence that every Kryn warrior learned from childhood. The humans were the 17th species that had ignored hegemony warnings this century, and like the 16 before them, they would learn their place in the galactic order soon enough. The Kryn had perfected the art of subjugation over millennia, approach with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior technology, demand submission, and integrate the conquered species into the hegemony as vassal states. It was efficient, and it was elegant, and it had never failed. Sir, sensors are detecting the human ship, another officer reported, his voice carrying a hint of confusion that made Veshkara's spine stiffen slightly. Display it, the commander ordered. The main screen shifted and showed a single vessel hanging in the void, near a small mining colony on a barren moon. The ship was unlike anything Veshkara had seen before. Angular, where Kryn vessels were curved, brutish where theirs were sleek, and covered in what appeared to be layered plating that looked more like armor than a proper hull. Analysis? Veshkara demanded. His science officer worked her console frantically, and her face showed concern as data scrolled across her screen. Commander, the mass readings are inconsistent with the vessel's apparent size. Our computers estimate it should be 3 times smaller based on standard ship design principles. Perhaps their construction methods are primitive, Veshkara suggested dismissively. There's something else, the science officer continued, her voice dropping. The power signature is unusual. It doesn't match any reactor type in our databases. It's generating far more energy than should be possible for a ship of that configuration. Veshkara felt a flicker of unease, but pushed it down with the certainty that came from 3,000 years of his species' victories. One strange ship meant nothing against 12 Kryn warships that had broken entire planetary defense networks. Bring us to optimal firing range, he commanded, and open a communication channel. The fleet moved into position with practiced precision, forming a crescent pattern that surrounded the human vessel on 3 sides of formation, designed to make resistance seem futile and surrender seem logical. The communication officer activated the channel, and Veshkara spoke with the authority of someone who had delivered this message dozens of times before. Attention, human vessel. You have entered territory claimed by the Kryn hegemony and have ignored our warnings to remain within your home system. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with the destruction of your ship and the seizure of your colony. You have 1 standard time unit to comply. The bridge fell silent as they waited for the inevitable response, usually fear or anger or desperate attempts at negotiation instead. A voice came through the speakers, calm and cold, and utterly unbothered by the threat of 12 warships. This is Captain Sarah Shun of the Human Colonial Defense Force Battlecruiser HMS Indomitable. You are in human territory, and you are ordered to reverse course immediately. You have 10 seconds to comply, or we will open fire. Veshkara blinked all 3 of his eyes in rapid succession, a Kryn expression of complete disbelief. In his entire military career, spanning 40 solar cycles, no one had ever responded to a hegemony ultimatum with a counter-threat lauder. bubbled up from deep in his thorax and spread across the bridge as other officers joined in. Did that primitive just threaten us? Someone asked between gasping breaths. Apparently their species lacks the intelligence to recognize a hopeless situation, another officer added. Veshkara raised one hand for silence, and the laughter died down, though amused expressions remained on every face. Very well, if they wish to learn the hard way, we shall teach them. Tactical. Prepare a warning shot. Disable their engine systems with a level 3 plasma lance. Target locked. Commander, the tactical officer confirmed. Fire. The flagship's main plasma lance erupted with brilliant blue-white energy that lanced across the void toward the human battlecruiser. It was a beautiful weapon, elegant and precise. The accumulated knowledge of millennia of Kryn weapons development made manifest. Veshkar watched his screen and waited for the satisfying image of the human vessel's engines going dark and the ship beginning to drift helplessly. He had seen it hundreds of times before, and it never got old. But what happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Just before the plasma lance reached the Indomitable, something changed. The space around the human ship suddenly filled with streaks of light, hundreds of them, moving faster than Kryn sensors could properly track. The plasma lance hit the defensive fire and simply ceased to exist, dispersed into harmless particles by what appeared to be solid projectiles moving at impossible velocities. The phased into harmless particles by what appeared to be solid velocities. The projectiles moving at impossible velocities. The mid-bridge of Veshkar's flagship went completely silent. What? He began. But his voice failed him. Commander, his tactical officer said, her voice shaking. They use kinetic point defense. Solid rounds fired at. She paused to check her readings. At 0.02% light speed. Our plasma lance was disrupted by the physical impacts before it could reach their hull. Veshkar stared at the screen where the human battlecruiser hung in space, completely undamaged and apparently waiting for his next move. Something cold settled into his stomach, something he hadn't felt since he was a young officer facing his first real combat simulation. This was not going to be a routine subjugation. This was going to be something else entirely. All ships, he said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. Prepare for coordinated assault, full power to plasma lance his target, the human vessel, and fire on my mark. If one shot could be stopped, perhaps overwhelming firepower would succeed where precision had failed. It was sound tactical doctrine. It was also about to become the worst mistake of his life. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the HMS Indomitable and watched the Kryn fleet with the cold calculation of someone who had studied military history since childhood. The alien ships were beautiful in their own way, sleek and elegant, and completely wrong for actual combat. They're charging weapons again, Lieutenant Marcus Webb reported from the tactical station, his fingers dancing across his console. All 12 ships this time. Looks like a coordinated strike. Sarah nodded and kept her expression neutral, even though her heart was pounding. This was the first real test of human military doctrine against an established galactic power. Point defense to automatic mode. Route auxiliary power to forward armor sections. Weapons free on my command. The Indomitable had been built in the orbital shipyards above Mars, and every centimeter of its design reflected hard lessons learned from humanity's violent history, where the Kryn ships relied on energy shields and lightweight hulls. Human engineers had gone back to basics: layered armor plating, redundant systems, and weapons designed to work even when everything else failed. Ma'am, Ensign Lisa Park called from communications. We're receiving multiple hails from the Kryn flagship. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Ignore them, Sarah said quietly, then added, all hands, battle stations, this is not a drill. We are weapons free and cleared to engage hostile forces. Throughout the ship, Alarms blared and crew members rushed to their posts. Marines sealed themselves into powered armor in the armory. Damage control teams prepped emergency equipment, and in the magazine, automated systems began loading the first salvo into the railgun batteries. Hostile vessels firing. Webb shouted. The view screen lit up with 12 brilliant beams of plasma energy converging on the Indomitable from different angles. It was actually impressive. Coordination, and against most opponents, it would have been. Instantly lethal, Sarah gripped the armrests of her command chair and watched as her ship's point defense system came alive. The Indomitable's hull bristled with railgun turrets, smaller versions of the main, batteries that could track and engage incoming threats with computer-guided precision. The sound that filled the ship was like thunder rolled into a continuous roar as hundreds of tungsten rounds launched at relativistic velocities. Each round was no bigger than a human thumb, but moving at a significant fraction of light speed. They carried enough kinetic energy to vaporize anything they touched. The plasma lances hit the defensive fire, and the results were exactly what human physicists had predicted. Superheated gas couldn't maintain cohesion when solid matter was punching through it at 30,000 kilometers per second. Most of the plasma dissipated harmlessly. The small amount that got through splashed against the Indomitable's armor and scorched the outer layers, but failed to penetrate the layered defensive plating beneath. Damage report, Sarah demanded. Forward armor sections 3 through 7 showing heat damage. The damage control officer reported. Ablative layers functioning as designed, no hull breaches. No casualties. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Kryn had just thrown their best punch, and the Indomitable had barely felt it. Weapons returned fire. Railgun batteries 1 through 4. Fire for effect. Webb's hands moved across his console, and his voice was tight with controlled excitement. Batteries 1 through 4. Firing now. The main railgun batteries were mounted. Along the Indomitable's spine 4 massive electromagnetic accelerators that could hurl projectiles across orbital distances with devastating accuracy. Ship shuddered as the first battery fired. The round was a tungsten-jacketed, depleted uranium penetrator weighing 200 kilograms and accelerating to 0.03 light speed in less than a second. Kryn fleet didn't even have time to react. The first round hit a Kryn cruiser amidships, and the results were catastrophic. The energy-dampening hull that had been designed to dissipate plasma fire offered no resistance to solid matter moving at relativistic velocity. The projectile punched through the alien ship like it was made of paper. The impact transferred so much kinetic energy that the vessel's internal structure simply disintegrated, and the ship came apart in an expanding cloud of debris and frozen atmosphere. Target destroyed, Webb reported, his voice showing the shock of someone witnessing this level of firepower for the first time. Continue firing, Sarah ordered. 3 more rounds launched in rapid succession, and 3 more. Kryn ships died before their commanders even understood what was happening. One moment, they were part of an overwhelming assault force. The next, they were expanding fields of wreckage on the flagship of the Kryn fleet. Commander Veshkara watched his tactical display and felt his blood turn to ice. 4 of his ships were simply gone, not damaged, not disabled, but erased from existence. Evasive maneuvers. He screamed. All ships scatter and engage emergency protocols. The surviving Kryn vessels broke formation and began desperate evasion patterns. But the Indomitable's tactical computer had already calculated firing solutions for the entire fleet. Ma'am, the Kryn ships are launching their own missiles, Park reported. Sarah nodded. I see them. How many? 48 total plasma warhead configuration, Webb answered. Interesting, Sarah said calmly. Launch counter battery. Sierra Mike 3 package. The Indomitable's missile bays opened and spat out a swarm of hunter-killer missiles each. one equipped with its own sensors and maneuvering thrusters and a 50-megaton nuclear warhead. The Kryn missiles were fast, and they were deadly against conventional targets. But they were designed for an era of warfare where nuclear weapons were considered barbaric and outdated. Humanity had never shared that opinion. Human missiles accelerated past the Kryn munitions, and their onboard computers selected targets with ruthless efficiency. Some went after the Kryn missiles themselves, while others locked onto the fleeing warships. Impacts in 3-1. Web-counted downspace lit up with multiple nuclear detonations. The Kryn missiles were vaporized by proximity blasts, while remaining human missiles continued toward their targets. A Kryn destroyer tried to outrun a pursuing missile and failed. The nuclear warhead detonated 50 meters from its hull, and the expanding sphere of plasma and radiation overwhelmed the ship's shields and cooked everything inside the hull. In seconds, another Kryn vessel attempted to shoot down an incoming missile with its plasma lances, but discovered that human missiles were built to survive point defense fire. The weapon detonated on contact with the ship's hull and turned the vessel into a brief new star. Sarah watched dispassionately as the battle unfolded exactly as Doctrine predicted. The Kryn had come expecting an easy victory against primitives, and instead, they had encountered a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing. Commander Webb said quietly, "3 Kryn ships are powering down weapons and broadcasting surrender on all frequencies." Sarah considered for a moment, then nodded. "Cease fire on surrendering vessels. Continue engagement with any ship that maintains hostile posture." The Indomitable's weapons fell silent but remained locked on target. Around them, the debris of 9 Kryn warships tumbled through space. 9 ships that had entered human territory expecting conquest and found only death. "Open a channel to the surrendering vessels." Sarah ordered. "Channel open." Park confirmed. "Attention Kryn vessels. You will maintain your current position and await boarding parties. Any attempt to flee or re-engage will result in your immediate destruction. These are your only terms." There was a long pause before a response came. A voice speaking broken human standard language with an accent that spoke of translation software struggling to keep up. We comply. Please, we surrender." Sarah settled back in her chair and allowed herself a long breath. The first battle between humanity and the Galactic Council was over. Humanity had won. Now came the harder part, making sure everyone in the galaxy understood what that victory meant. Commander Veshkara sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display that showed only 3 green icons, where 12 had been minutes before. His hands trembled slightly, something that would have shamed him beyond measure in any other circumstance. But right now, shame was the least of his concerns. "Sir," his communication officer said softly, "the humans are launching small craft toward our position." Veshkara nodded numbly and watched the screen as dozens of dropships detached from the human Battlecruiser and began moving toward the 3 surviving Kryn vessels. This was occupation by a species his people had dismissed as primitives barely worth noticing. "Stand down all weapons," he ordered, his voice hollow, and order all crew to assemble in the main corridors. No one is to resist the humans when they board. Around him, his bridge crew moved with the slow, deliberate motions of people in shock. They had trained their entire lives for war, for glorious victories against inferior opponents, and none of their training had prepared them for this. The first human dropship clamped onto the flagship's docking port with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull. Veshkara stood and straightened his uniform and walked toward the airlock. With as much dignity as he could manage, what emerged from the human ship made his breath catch in his thorax. The Marines were enormous, 2 meters tall and encased in powered armor that made them look like mechanical monsters from a nightmare. Their helmets hid their faces behind reflective visors, and each one carried weapons that looked brutal and efficient. The lead Marine stepped forward, and his armor speakers translated his words into Kryn with mechanical precision. I am Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres of the Human Colonial Marine Corps. All Kryn personnel will move to the main cargo bay immediately and sit with hands visible. Anyone who fails to comply will be considered hostile. Do you understand? Veshkara managed to nod and gestured to his crew. We understand. We will comply. What followed was the most efficient and terrifying military operation Veshkara had ever witnessed. The human Marines moved through his ship like a machine. Every corridor was cleared with 2 Marines covering, while others advanced. Every door was checked for traps before being opened. Every room was swept with weapons raised and ready. There was no conversation, no hesitation, no mercy for potential threats. The humans operated under the assumption that every corner could hide an enemy and every friendly face could be a trap. When Veshkara's crew was assembled in the cargo bay, sitting on the deck with their hands on their heads, one Marine stood guard while others continued to sweep the ship. It took less than 20 minutes for them to secure a vessel that would have taken Kryn security forces hours to clear. You, Sergeant Torres pointed at Veshkara. Are you the commanding officer? I am Commander Veshkara of the Kryn hegemony, he replied, trying to maintain some dignity. Come with me, Torres ordered. Captain Chun wants to speak with you. The trip back to the Indomitable was conducted in silence. Veshkara sat in the dropship, surrounded by armed Marines, and tried not to think about how easily they could kill him if they chose to. Indomitable's interior was nothing like a Kryn warship, where Kryn vessels were built with elegant curves and artistic touches. The human battlecruiser was all function over form-bare metal corridors marked with painted lines and warning signs. Exposed pipes and conduits running along the ceiling. Blast doors every 20 meters. But as they walked, Veshkara began to notice something that made his skin prickle. Redundancy. Every system had a backup. Every corridor had multiple exits. Every weapon station had ammunition stored nearby. The ship was designed to keep fighting even when major sections were destroyed. It was the product of a species that expected to take damage and planned accordingly. Captain Chen's ready room was small and functional. One wall was covered with paintings and photographs that showed human warriors throughout their history, ancient soldiers with spears, sailors on wooden ships with cannons, aircraft dropping bombs, and modern Marines in armor similar to what Torres wore. Chen herself sat behind a metal desk and regarded Veshkara with dark eyes that showed no emotion. She gestured to a chair across from her and waited for him to sit. Commander Veshkara, she said calmly, I am Captain Sarah Chun. Before we discuss terms, I need to understand why your fleet attacked a human vessel in human-controlled space. Veshkara felt a flash of indignation, but pushed it down. We did not attack, we delivered a standard hegemony ultimatum. This system is within Kryn-claimed territory, and— Stop, China interrupted, her voice sharp. You fired on my ship. That's an act of war by any definition. Now you can either explain the political situation, or you can remain silent. But don't insult my intelligence by claiming you didn't attack us. The blunt directness was jarring. Kryn officers would have engaged in hours of diplomatic dancing before getting to such pointed questions. The Kryn hegemony has controlled this sector for 3,000 standard years, Veshkara explained, choosing his words carefully. When a new species enters our territory, we extend an invitation to join the hegemony under our protection. Those who refuse are persuaded to accept our terms. Persuaded by military force, Chun said flatly. When necessary. Yes, Veshkara admitted. Chun stood and walked to the wall of paintings, her back to Veshkara. Do you know what these images represent? Your military history. I assume. They represent 10,000 years of humans learning how to kill each other more efficiently. Chum said quietly. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held off an army of hundreds of thousands. The Battle of Trafalgar, where one fleet destroyed another despite being outnumbered. The Battle of Midway, where aircraft carriers revolutionized naval warfare. The Mars Rebellion, where colonists fought Earth's military to a standstill. She turned back to face him. Every species in your Galactic Council developed on relatively peaceful worlds. You discovered faster-than-light travel and spread to the stars without ever perfecting the art of total war. Veshkara felt cold certainty settling into his bones as he understood what she was saying. Humanity didn't have that luxury. Chum continued, Earth is a death world by galactic standards, hostile environment. Dangerous predators, natural disasters that can wipe out entire civilizations. We evolved to survive in hell, and then we spent millennia competing against each other for resources. She sat back down and fixed him with that emotionless stare. Your plasma lances are elegant. Our railguns are brutal. Your shields are sophisticated. Our armor is redundant and ugly. Your tactics assume honorable opponents. Our doctrine assumes everyone is trying to kill us. I understand, Veshkara said softly. I don't think you do, Chang replied. Because if you did, you never would have attacked us. The Indomitable is one ship, one of 24 in the Colonial Defense Force, and Earth has plans to build 300 more. She leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to send a message to your Hegemony High Command. You're going to tell them that human space is off limits and that any further incursions will be met with total war. You're going to recommend they offer us a peace treaty and trade agreements. And if my superiors refuse? Veshkara asked. Then we'll destroy every Kryn military asset we encounter until they change their minds. Chum said simply, we don't want war. Commander, but we're better at it than you could possibly imagine. Veshkara looked at the paintings on the wall and felt the weight of 3,000 years of Kryn dominance crumbling around him. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, carrying lessons learned in blood. The age of easy conquest was over. The Galactic Council chamber was located on the neutral world of Meridian Prime and had hosted diplomatic sessions for over 2 millennia. The vast circular room could accommodate representatives from 30 different species and had witnessed countless treaties and agreements that shaped the course of galactic civilization today. It hosted something unprecedented. An emergency session called because a member species had suffered a crushing military defeat at the hands of a previously unknown civilization. Ambassador Krelliner of the Kryn hegemony stood at the central podium and felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon him. Around the chamber, representatives from species that had existed peacefully under Kryn protection or domination, depending on one's perspective, waited to hear his report. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his hearts. 3 standard cycles ago, a Kryn peacekeeping fleet encountered a human military vessel in a disputed border region. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The humans were known barely as a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 standard years ago and had established mining colonies on a handful of worlds. The fleet commander, following standard protocols, issued an ultimatum for the human vessel to stand down and accept hegemony oversight. Krellina continued. The humans refused and opened fire when warning shots were delivered. The murmurs grew louder. Such defiance was rare, but not unheard of. There were always species foolish enough to resist initially. The result, Krelliner paused and steeled himself, was the destruction of 9 Kryn warships and the capture of the remaining 3 vessels. Silence fell across the chamber like a physical weight. For several long moments, no one spoke or moved. Then Ambassador Thylon of the Vesper Concordat stood, her crystalline form reflecting the chamber's lights in rainbow patterns. Forgive me, Ambassador Krelliner, but I must have misheard. Did you say 1 human ship destroyed 9 Kryn vessels? That is correct, Krelliner confirmed. That's impossible. Someone shouted from the upper galleries. The Kryn fleet has broken planetary defense networks. How could primitives possibly? They are not primitives, Krelliner interrupted sharply. That was our mistake, a mistake that cost thousands of Kryn lives. He activated the holographic display, and the chamber filled with three-dimensional recordings from the battle. The assembled ambassadors watched in growing horror as human weapons tore through Kryn ships with contemptuous ease when the footage ended. Krelliner spoke into the shocked silence. Humans fight with kinetic weapon-solid projectiles accelerated to relativistic velocities. Our energy shields and dampening fields are useless against such attacks. Furthermore, their vessels are armored with layered defensive plating that can withstand sustained plasma lance fire. Ambassador Sorax of the Threen Collective rose, his 6 arms gesturing in agitation. But surely this is an anomaly. One advanced ship does not make them a military threat to the entire council. Intelligence reports indicate that the humans have at least 24 vessels of similar capability, Krelliner said grimly, with plans to construct hundreds more. Moreover, our analysis of their technology suggests they have been developing weapons specifically designed to counter energy-based defenses. Why would they do such a thing? Thelen asked. Genuine confusion in her melodic voice. Krelliner pulled up another display, this one showing images and data compiled from human broadcasts and historical records. Because on their homeworld, they spent 10,000 years at war with each other. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. The concept was difficult for most council species to comprehend. Millennia of warfare between members of the same species seemed wasteful beyond belief. Earth is classified as a Class 7 death world. Krelliner continued, raising his voice to be heard. It has hostile megafauna, unstable weather patterns, and limited resources relative to its population capacity. Humanity evolved in an environment that rewarded aggression and punished weakness. He brought up more images, human soldiers, throughout their history. Wars fought with increasingly sophisticated weapons. Tactical doctrines refined through countless conflicts, while we were developing faster-than-light travel and energy weapons, Krelliner said. Humanity was perfecting the art of total war. They understand concepts like strategic depth, combined arms tactics, and asymmetric warfare in ways that we have never needed to consider. So what do you propose? Sorax demanded. Should we unite our fleets and strike before they can spread further? Krelliner shook his head slowly. The Hegemony Military Command has run simulations. Even if we could unite every council fleet under one command, which is politically impossible, we estimate a 30% chance of defeating the humans in open warfare. 30%? Tholan's voice was faint with disbelief. And that assumes they have no weapons or capabilities we haven't already encountered, Krelliner added. The humans have demonstrated a preference for redundancy and deception in military matters. It is highly likely they possess additional surprises. An ambassador from the Lothran Assembly stood, his scaled face showing obvious agitation. But we cannot simply allow them to expand unchecked. They could threaten the entire galactic order, which is why the Kryn hegemony is proposing a different approach, Krelliner said, pulling up a new document. We recommend offering the humans full council membership, trade agreements, and recognize sovereignty over their current territorial claims. The chamber exploded with objections and arguments. Dozens of ambassadors tried to speak at once, while others activated their translation devices to maximum volume. Krelliner waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. The alternative is war, a war we are not certain we can win, and one that would cost millions of lives. Furthermore, the humans have made certain demands as part of their peace proposal. What demands? Tholan asked. They require that all 17 species currently under Kryn protection be granted full independence and council representation, Krelliner said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. What the humans were demanding was the effective dissolution of the Kryn hegemony as a political entity. This is outrageous. Sirax bellowed. The humans have no right to dictate terms to species they have never even encountered. And yet they have the military capability to enforce those terms, Krelliner countered. The Hegemony Council has analyzed the situation and concluded that accepting these demands is preferable to continued conflict. You're surrendering, someone accused from the galleries. We're being practical, Krelliner replied firmly. The humans have proven they can destroy our fleets. Refusing their terms would only result in more deaths and an eventual surrender under worse conditions. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. For 3,000 years, the Kryn hegemony maintained peace through the threat of overwhelming force. We assumed that our technology and experience made us invincible. The humans have demonstrated that our assumptions were wrong. Thulin rose again, her crystalline form shimmering. If we accept the human terms, we establish a precedent that military force can overturn established political structures. What prevents other species from following their example? Nothing, Krelliner admitted. But consider this. Humanity could have destroyed all 3 surviving Kryn ships. Instead, they accepted our surrender and treated captured crew according to acceptable standards. They could have demanded tribute or territory. Instead, they asked only for peace and the freedom of oppressed species. He paused to let that sink in. The humans may be warriors, but they are not conquerors in the traditional sense. They fight for survival and freedom, not for domination. How can you be certain of that? Sirax challenged. Because Captain Chen told me so, Krelliner said simply, and because everything in their history supports that claim. Humans fight most fiercely when defending their independence or the independence of others. The chamber fell into thoughtful silence as the ambassadors processed this information. Finally, Thulin spoke for many when she said, "Then perhaps we should welcome these humans, not as threats, but as allies who can help us remember that peace must be maintained through justice, not just force." The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Galactic Council would extend an offer of peace and membership to humanity. The age of easy domination was over, but perhaps the age of genuine cooperation was just beginning. The HMS Indomitable slid into its berth at the orbital shipyards above Earth with the grace of a predator returning home. The massive battlecruisers' hull still bore the scorch marks from Kryn plasma, lances damage that had been left, deliberately unrepaired as a reminder to both humanity and the galaxy of what had transpired in that distant star system. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge one final time before disembarking and looked out at the planet. Below the blue-green marble that had given birth to a species stubborn enough to survive everything the universe threw at them, Captain, Lieutenant Webb said from his station. "We're receiving a transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Okonkwo wants to see you immediately upon arrival." Sarah nodded and gathered her personal belongings from her ready room. 24 hours ago, she had been a simple ship commander protecting a mining colony. Now she was about to become something else entirely. The trip down to Earth on the orbital shuttle gave her time to think about everything that had changed. Through the window, she could see dozens of ships under construction, not just battlecruisers like the Indomitable, but carriers, destroyers, supply vessels, and even larger ships whose purposes she could only guess at. Humanity had spent 50 years cautiously exploring the nearby star systems and establishing small colonies. The Kryn attack had ended that caution permanently. Earth was going on a war footing whether the peace talks succeeded or not. Admiral Okonkwo met her in his office at Fleet Command headquarters in Geneva. He was a tall man with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat during the Mars Rebellion. "Captain Chun," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Congratulations on your victory, and thank you for not starting an interstellar war we couldn't win." Sarah sat and allowed herself a slight smile. "We got lucky, sir. If the Kryn had scattered immediately, instead of trying to stand and fight, we might not have been able to stop them all. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," Okonkwo quoted, "and you were prepared. Your crew performed flawlessly, and your tactical decisions were sound." He pulled up a holographic display showing star charts with human territory marked in blue and Kryn space in red. "The Galactic Council has accepted our terms. 17 species formerly under Kryn control are being granted independence, and the hegemony has agreed to recognize our sovereignty over all systems within 50 light years of Sol. That's a significant territorial gain," Sarah observed. "It's also a significant responsibility," Okonkwo countered. "Those 17 species are going to be looking to us for protection against other potential threats. We've positioned ourselves as liberators. Now we have to live up to that reputation." He deactivated the display and fixed her with a serious look. "Which brings me to your new assignment. You're being promoted to Commodore and given command of Battlegroup Talon 12 ships, including the Indomitable as your flagship." Sarah felt her breath catch. Commanding one ship was challenging enough. Commanding an entire battle group was a completely different level of responsibility. "Your mission will be to patrol the border regions and make contact with the newly independent species," Okonkwo continued. "We need to establish diplomatic relationships and demonstrate that humanity is interested in cooperation, not conquest." "Understood, sir," Sarah said. Though privately she wondered how she was supposed to look non-threatening while commanding enough firepower to level a planet. "There's one more thing," Okonkwo added. "We're establishing a new military academy on Luna, joint training facility where human officers will learn about galactic politics and alien officers can learn about human military doctrine." "Integration," Sarah said softly. "Exactly," Okonkwo confirmed. "We can't just be the scary humans with the big guns. We need to be partners in maintaining galactic peace. That means teaching others our methods while learning from their experience." Sarah considered this for a moment before speaking, carefully. "Sir, do you think the Council really understands what they're dealing with? We showed them we can win battles, but do they comprehend how humans approach warfare on a strategic level?" Okonkwo leaned back in his chair with a tired expression. "Some of them do. Ambassador Krelliner certainly seems to grasp it. Others think we just got lucky or that the Kryn were incompetent. Those are the ones we need to educate before someone else makes the same mistake." He pulled up another display, this one showing footage from the battle Kryn ships being torn apart by railgun fire and nuclear detonations. "The Council has been peaceful for thousands of years because no one had the capability to challenge the established powers. We've disrupted that equilibrium, and nature abhors a vacuum." Sarah finished the thought. "Precisely," Okonkwo agreed. "Other species are going to test us, some through diplomacy, others through military probing. We need to be strong enough to deter aggression, but wise enough to know when force isn't the answer." Sarah stood and saluted. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't," Okonkwo replied. Returning the salute, dismissed Commodore Chen. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Indomitable once again, but this time she commanded not just one ship, but an entire battle group that represented humanity's reach into the galaxy around her. The other vessels of Battlegroup Talon maintained perfect formation. 4 destroyers designed for long-range engagements, 3 frigates optimized for point defense, 2 supply ships carrying enough ammunition and fuel for extended operations, and 2 cruisers whose armament rivaled the Indomitable's own. All ships report ready for departure. "Commodore," Webb reported from his station. He had been promoted to commander, and remained her tactical officer despite offers of his own command. "Excellent," Sarah said, settling into her command chair with the comfort of familiar surroundings. "Helm, take us out best speed to the Arcturus sector." As the battle group accelerated away from Earth, Sarah pulled up a message on her personal display, a communication from one of the newly independent species. "The Velen Confederation. To the humans of Earth, we thank you for your intervention in securing our freedom from Kryn control. We have heard stories of your combat capabilities and your warrior culture. We wish to establish diplomatic relations and learn from your experience. Please visit our homeworld at your earliest convenience. Ambassador Ralka of the Velen Confederation." It was polite, grateful, and just a little bit afraid. Exactly the reaction Sarah had expected. She composed a careful response, emphasizing humanity's desire for peaceful cooperation and confirming that Battlegroup Talon would visit Velen space within the next standard month. As she sent the message, she reflected on everything that had changed in such a short time. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not with tentative diplomacy but with overwhelming force, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Kryn had learned their lesson about underestimating humans. Other species would learn it too, either through peaceful contact or through the harsh teacher that was military defeat. Sarah hoped it would be the former, but she was prepared for the latter. That was the human way: hope for peace, but prepare for war with ruthless efficiency around her. The crew of the Indomitable worked at their stations with the confidence of warriors who had been tested in battle and emerged victorious. They understood what the ship represented, not just military might, but 10,000 years of human history compressed into steel and firepower. They were not conquerors seeking dominion over others. They were defenders willing to stand against any threat to humanity's independence and the freedom of those who sought their help. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and dangers. Humanity was just beginning to explore, but wherever they went, they would carry with them the lessons learned through millennia of conflict on Earth. Never surrender when you can fight. Never fight when you can negotiate. But never negotiate from a position of weakness. It was a philosophy that had served humanity well on Earth, and Sarah was confident it would serve them equally well among the stars. The age of easy galactic dominance was over. The age of human influence was just beginning. Indomitable and its battle group jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared into the vast expanse of space. 12 ships carrying humanity's hopes and humanity's strength into the unknown behind them. Earth continued its preparations. Shipyards worked around the clock, building new vessels. Marines trained for combat in alien environments. Diplomats studied galactic politics and alien cultures. Humanity was ready for whatever came next. They had survived Earth's challenges and emerged as apex predators. Now they would show the galaxy what that really meant, not through conquest or cruelty, but through strength tempered with wisdom and force, applied with justice. The Kryn fleet had frozen the moment they faced a human Battlecruiser because they finally understood what the rest of the galaxy was beginning to learn. Humanity was not just another species to be cataloged and dismissed. They were survivors, warriors, diplomats, and explorers who brought with them both the capacity for terrible violence and the wisdom to know when violence was necessary. The galaxy would adjust to this new reality, some species through alliance, others through careful distance, and a few unfortunate ones through the harsh lessons of combat. But adjust they would, because humanity was here to stay, and the stars themselves would bear witness to everything that followed.